The scent of aging paper and dried ink was the only society Elara Vance truly kept. It was a constant, predictable companion in the cavernous, unheated map room of Blackwood Manor, a place forgotten by all but her. For 7 years since her parents' passing had left her an orphan ward of her distant cousin, Lord Ashworth, this had been her world. She existed in the margins of the household, a ghost in a plain woolen dress, tasked with the endless, meticulous work of cataloging the Ashworth family's sprawling collection of maps and deeds. At 24, she had perfected the art of invisibility. The grandfather clock in the great hall chimed 4, its mournful tone barely penetrating the thick oak door of her sanctuary. Elara paid it no mind, her concentration fixed on a delicate 16th century map of the Cornish coast. Her slender fingers, stained with restorative solution, gently coaxed a curling edge of parchment to lie flat. This was where she felt alive, amidst the silent histories of the world, tracing the lines of forgotten coastlines and the boundaries of empires long turned to dust. She understood the language of these documents, the subtle shift in a cartographer's hand, the watermark that betrayed a forgery, the hidden meaning in a cartouche's flourish. It was a knowledge she had cultivated in silence, a skill no one in this house had ever thought to ask about. "Miss Vance," a sharp voice cut through her concentration. Lady Beatrice Ashworth stood in the doorway, her silk gown rustling with impatience, a stark slash of lavender against the room's muted browns. "You are to make yourself scarce this evening. We are expecting a guest of considerable importance." Elara rose, inclining her head. "Of course, my lady. And see that this room is presentable," Lady Ashworth added, her gaze sweeping over the stacks of maps and restoration tools with distaste. "Our guest has an interest in antiquities, though I cannot imagine why he would wish to spend any time in this dusty crypt." She did not wait for a reply, turning on her heel and leaving Elara in the sudden, ringing silence. A guest of importance. That could only mean one person. For weeks the household had been buzzing with nervous energy, the servants whispering in shadowed corridors, Lord Ashworth alternating between fits of blustering pride and anxious agitation. Duke Alistair Beaumont was coming to Blackwood. The Duke of Blackwood was a figure of grim legend. Whispers followed him like his own shadow, a man of immense wealth and influence, who had retreated from society 5 years prior after the tragic and mysterious death of his young wife. They said he was cold, ruthless, that his coastal estate, Blackthorn Keep, was as forbidding as its master. They said his gaze could unnerve the most hardened of men, and now he was coming here. Elara felt a familiar knot of apprehension. Important guests meant more opportunities for her to be reprimanded for being seen, for breathing too loudly, for simply existing. It meant the looming presence of Julian Ashworth, Lord Ashworth's son, whose casual cruelties and unwanted attentions had grown bolder in recent months. She resolved to be more ghost-like than ever. Later that evening, having taken her meager meal in the kitchens, Elara retreated to the map room. She felt safest here. The main house was a symphony of forced gaiety and tension, but in her dusty domain, the world was still. She was working by the light of a single precious candle, mending the spine of a leather-bound atlas, when the door creaked open. She froze, expecting the reek of brandy that always preceded Julian. But the figure who stepped inside was taller, broader, and cast a shadow that seemed to consume the candlelight. He was dressed in severe black, his dark hair untouched by powder, his features sharp and angular, as if carved from granite. He closed the door behind him, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality that made Elara's heart leap into her throat. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept the room, not with the disdain of the Ashworths, but with a keen, assessing curiosity. They passed over the towering shelves, the neatly organized folios, and finally they settled on her. For a long, breathless moment, he simply looked. It was not Julian's leering gaze, nor Lady Ashworth's dismissive one. It was something else entirely. An intense, focused scrutiny that seemed to peel back the layers of her invisibility and see the woman beneath. Elara dropped into a half curtsy, her eyes fixed on the floorboards. "Your Grace, I beg your pardon. I was just finishing my work." "You are the archivist," he stated. It was not a question. His voice was a low baritone, a quiet rumble that held an undeniable note of command. I, I suppose I am, Your Grace. Miss Vance. He took a step closer, and Elara fought the urge to shrink back. Lord Ashworth informed me his collection was managed by some relation. He failed to mention she possessed the hands of a master restorer. His gaze dropped to the atlas on her workbench, to the neat, almost surgical precision of her stitching. No one had ever called her a master of anything. The unexpected praise left her momentarily speechless. I am self-taught, Your Grace. The best masters often are, he replied, his eyes lifting to meet hers again. She felt the force of his famous gaze then, and understood why people found it unsettling. It was as if he could see the thoughts in her head, the years of loneliness etched around her heart. I was told you might be able to locate a series of coastal surveys. 17th century, commissioned by a Baron Trevelyan. The Trevelyan surveys, Elara said, her professional instincts overriding her fear. They are in the West Gallery, third folio from the left. Several are quite fragile. The ink has faded badly on the one depicting the southern cliffs of Blackthorn. A flicker of surprise crossed his severe features. You know the collection that well? It has been my world for 7 years, Your Grace. He moved past her toward the West Gallery, his stride long and purposeful. Elara remained by her bench, her heart thudding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She had been seen, truly seen, and it was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. He returned a few moments later, a large rolled parchment in his hand. He spread it carefully on a clear section of the table, his long fingers surprisingly gentle. This one, he said, his voice tight. The coastline is inaccurate, altered. Elara moved to his side, drawn by the professional puzzle. She leaned closer, her world narrowing to the faded lines on the parchment. You're right, she murmured, forgetting for a moment who she was speaking to. Look here. The original ink has been scraped away, very skillfully, but you can see the disturbance in the parchment fibers if you hold the candle just so. She angled the light. Someone has redrawn the inlet and the cliff path. The original path was much closer to the edge. He was silent for so long that she feared she had overstepped. When she finally dared to look up, his expression was unreadable, his stormy eyes fixed on the altered map. He seemed a world away, lost in some dark memory. Then his gaze shifted, focusing on her with the same unnerving intensity. He was standing very close, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him in the chilly room. He leaned in, his voice a low, resonant whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. It was not threatening, yet it was weighted with a significance that resonated deep within her soul. I was told I would find a keeper of maps, he said, his lips barely moving, but I see they were mistaken. He held her gaze, and in the flickering candlelight, Elara felt as if the entire world had paused on its axis. I found you. The Duke's words echoed in Elara's mind long after he had departed the map room, leaving her with the altered survey in a quiet, "We will speak again tomorrow, Miss Vance." The encounter had unsettled the careful equilibrium of her existence. For 7 years, her anonymity had been her shield. Now a crack had appeared in it, and she wasn't sure if the light streaming through was a promise or a threat. The next day, the atmosphere in Blackwood Manor was thick with a new kind of tension. Lord Ashworth was fawning, Lady Beatrice was brittle, and Julian was openly resentful. The Duke, it seemed, had shown little interest in their attempts to charm him, spending most of the morning closeted with his solicitor in the study. Elara kept to her sanctuary, half hoping and half dreading the Duke's return. He appeared in the late afternoon without preamble, finding her comparing the altered survey with another from the same period. "Any progress, Miss Vance?" he asked, forgoing any formal greeting. "I believe so, Your Grace." She gestured to the 2 maps laid side by side. The second map is from the same cartographer, dated 2 years later. It shows the original cliff path. By overlaying them and measuring the parallax drift of the coastal landmarks, I can reconstruct where the original path lay with near certainty. It was significantly more treacherous. He studied her work, his expression thoughtful. Why would someone go to the trouble of altering a map so meticulously? "Maps are power, Your Grace," Elara said softly. "They define ownership. They dictate safe passage. They can conceal or reveal truths. To change a map is to change a version of reality. Perhaps someone wanted to hide the existence of the original path, or create the illusion of a safer one. His gaze met hers over the ancient parchment. A dangerous talent, Miss Vance. The ability to discern which reality is true. Before she could reply, Julian Ashworth appeared in the doorway, a sneer twisting his handsome features. There you are, Your Grace. My father was hoping for a moment of your time to discuss the landholdings. Must you trouble yourself with the dusty business of my cousin? The Duke straightened to his full, imposing height, his cool gaze falling on Julian. Miss Vance's dusty business is precisely why I'm here, Mr. Ashworth. Her expertise is proving invaluable. Julian's eyes narrowed, a flicker of possessive anger in their depths. Indeed. Well, Elara, you should not monopolize His Grace's time. I'm sure you have ledgers to dust or some such thing. On the contrary, the Duke said, his voice dropping to a dangerously smooth tone, I have requested that Miss Vance dedicate her time exclusively to my research while I am here. She will report directly to me. The declaration hung in the air like a thunderclap. Julian stared, his face flushing with fury, while Elara felt a dizzying mix of panic and vindication. She was no longer just the Ashworth's ward. She was the Duke of Blackwood's chosen expert. Julian recovered with a tight, unpleasant smile. Of course, Your Grace. Whatever you wish. We are all here to serve your needs. He shot Elara a look that was pure poison before withdrawing. He does not like you, the Duke observed neutrally once they were alone. The feeling is mutual, Your Grace. The words were out before she could stop them. A ghost of a smile touched Alistair Beaumont's lips. I am beginning to see that. Be cautious, Miss Vance. The warning was unnecessary. Julian's resentment was a palpable force in the house over the next few days. He found small ways to inconvenience her. A crucial reference book would go missing. A pot of ink would be accidentally spilled near her work. Elara knew it was his doing, but she had no proof and no one to appeal to. Her work with the Duke, however, became her shield and her focus. They spent hours together in the map room, piecing together the history of the Blackthorn estate through its cartographic records. She learned that he was not so much cold as he was contained, his emotions held in careful check. He spoke little of himself, but his questions were sharp, his intellect undeniable. He listened to her explanations with a focused attention that made her feel, for the first time, like a respected colleague rather than a dependent. One afternoon, while searching for a deed box that corresponded with the Trevelyan surveys, Elara's hand brushed against a loose panel at the back of a deep shelf. Her archivist's curiosity piqued. She pressed gently. The panel swung inward, revealing a small dark cavity. Inside lay a small leather-bound journal. It was not an Ashworth family crest on the cover. It was the sigil of the Beaumonts, the Duke's family. Her hands trembling slightly, she opened it. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. Alistair does not understand the darkness that plagues my mind. It read, He thinks it is a passing melancholy. He offers logic and reason when all I feel is the sea calling to me, a constant, mournful song. The cliffs near the old path, they seem to whisper my name. Elara's blood ran cold. This had to be the journal of the late Duchess. How had it come to be hidden here, in Blackwood Manor? Have you ever stumbled upon a secret so profound it felt as if the very air had grown heavy with its weight? That is how she felt in that moment, holding a woman's final, desperate thoughts in her hands. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Well, well, what have we found? Elara spun around, clutching the journal to her chest. Julian stood there, his eyes gleaming with a triumphant, predatory light. Secrets, cousin? You shouldn't keep secrets from family. He took a slow step into the room, his smile widening. Especially not when they might be of value. The Duke has been searching for something ever since he arrived. I wonder if that little book is it. It's nothing, Elara said, her voice shaking. A book of poetry. Is it? He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist in a painful grip. Let me see. No! She twisted away, but he was stronger. He pinned her against the bookshelf, his face inches from hers. The smell of brandy on his breath was suffocating. You've grown bold, little mouse, under the Duke's protection, he hissed. But he isn't here now. I think it's time you remembered your place. Give me the book. The journal was the only thing of importance in her hands, but her mind, honed by years of navigating her perilous environment, saw another weapon. With her free hand, she grabbed a heavy, cylindrical map weight from the table beside her. It was solid brass, nearly a foot long. "I said, give it to me," Julian snarled, trying to wrench the journal from her grasp. "Get back," she warned, her voice low and trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Or what? You'll hit me? You don't have the nerve." He was wrong. As his hand tightened on her wrist, a lifetime of humiliation, of fear, of being made to feel small and worthless, coalesced into a single, defiant act. She swung the brass weight with all her might, connecting solidly with his shoulder. He yelled a cry of shock and pain and stumbled back, releasing her. His face was a mask of disbelief and rage. "You little viper, you'll pay for that." He came at her again, but the sound of the door opening froze them both. The Duke of Blackwood stood on the threshold, his stormy eyes taking in the scene in an instant. Elara pressed against the shelves, chest heaving, a brass weight in her hand. Julian clutching his shoulder, his face contorted with fury. The air crackled with violence. "Ashworth," the Duke's voice was deceptively soft, yet it cut through the tension like a shard of ice. "Take your hands off her." Julian paled, his bluster evaporating under that glacial gaze. "Your Grace, this is a family matter. The girl attacked me." "I have excellent hearing, Mr. Ashworth," Alistair interrupted, stepping fully into the room. "And I believe I heard Miss Vance tell you to get back. You chose to disregard her. A poor choice." He took another deliberate step forward, a silent, menacing promise. "Now leave, before you make an even poorer one." Julian hesitated for a second. Then, with a venomous glare at Elara, he turned and stalked from the room. The silence he left behind was profound. Elara's adrenaline-fueled strength drained away, leaving her shaking. The brass weight slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. The small leather journal was still clutched in her other hand. Alistair crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a steadying force. "Are you harmed?" She shook her head, unable to speak. His gaze fell to the journal in her hand. A shadow of profound pain crossed his face. "You found it." "It was hidden," she whispered, holding it out to him. "I didn't mean to pry. I didn't know what it was." He took the journal, his fingers brushing hers. The brief contact sent a jolt through her. "I know," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. This is what I truly came here for. I suspected the Ashworths had it." "But why?" Elara asked, finding her voice. "Why would they have your wife's journal?" Alistair looked from the book to her, his expression grim. "Because, Miss Vance, they are not negotiating a land deal with me. They are blackmailing me." The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. Blackmail. It explained everything. Lord Ashworth's anxiety, Lady Beatrice's strained civility, Julian's possessive fury. They didn't see Elara as an obstacle to a business deal, but as a threat to their hold over the Duke. "The altered map," Elara breathed, the pieces clicking into place. "And the journal. What do they have to do with each other?" Alistair's jaw tightened. "My wife, Lenora, she was not well. She suffered from a deep melancholy, a darkness of the mind that no doctor could cure." The clinical description was belied by the raw grief in his eyes. "She fell from the cliffs at Blackthorn. The coroner ruled it a tragic accident. She was known to walk there, and the path was treacherous." "The original path," Elara whispered. "The one that was scraped from the map." He nodded grimly. "That map, the official survey, was commissioned by her family after her death, to make the path appear safer than it was, to protect their name from the scandal of her taking her own life. But this journal," he gestured with the book, "contains passages that could be twisted. Passages where she wrote of my frustration with her illness, of my arguments with her. Taken out of context, a clever blackmailer could suggest that her fall was no accident." "And the Ashworths found the journal," Elara concluded. "Lenora's lady's maid disappeared after her death. I now believe she stole the journal and sold it to Lord Ashworth, who has been waiting for the opportune moment to use it. His price for returning it and the original maps? My signature on a partnership that would give him control of my shipping interests in Bristol. Elara sank onto a nearby stool, her mind reeling. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. They were using a woman's private pain as a weapon. "Tonight, at dinner," she said, her voice barely audible. "That's when he plans to make his final demand, isn't it?" "Yes," Alistair confirmed. "He believes he has me trapped." His gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his guarded expression. He is very nearly right. A public accusation, however baseless, would resurrect the scandal. The Tun would delight in seeing the feared Duke of Blackwood brought low by rumors of murder. Elara looked at the tools on her workbench, the delicate instruments for restoration, the chemicals for revealing faded ink. Then she looked at the Duke, a man who, for all his power, was being tormented by vultures. She had spent her life in the shadows, silent and observant, but silence now felt like complicity. "He may believe he has you trapped, Your Grace," she said, a new resolve hardening her voice, "but he has made a critical error. He has underestimated the archivist." "What are you planning, Miss Vance?" "Lord Ashworth thinks his power lies in a secret document," she said, rising to her feet. "But a document's power lies in its interpretation, and I am, if nothing else, an expert interpreter." A plan began to form in her mind, audacious and fraught with risk, but it was the only way. "He wants to use your wife's words against you. I think it's time we let the Duchess speak for herself." In her own hand. The dinner that evening was a masterpiece of tension. Lord Ashworth presided over the table with the smug confidence of a man about to close the deal of a lifetime. Lady Beatrice was sharp and watchful, while Julian nursed his bruised shoulder and glared at Elara with undisguised hatred. Elara, to their immense surprise, was present at the Duke's explicit request. She sat quietly, a ghost at the feast, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. "I trust you have had time to consider my proposal, Your Grace," Lord Ashworth began as the port was served. "A most mutually beneficial arrangement." "I have," Alistair replied, his voice a calm, deep note in the expectant silence, "and I find your terms exorbitant." Lord Ashworth's smile tightened. "Perhaps, but the price of discretion can be high. I have in my possession certain documents that could prove embarrassing. A journal, for instance, and a rather interesting map. Items that paint a very different picture of the late Duchess's tragic accident." "Indeed," Alistair said, leaning back in his chair. "You refer, I assume, to your wife's journal?" He placed the small leather book on the table beside his wine glass. Lord Ashworth stared at it, his face draining of color. "How? You should really secure your hiding places more effectively, my lord," Alistair said coolly. "As for the map, Miss Vance has been most helpful in her analysis." All eyes turned to Elara. She met Lord Ashworth's furious gaze without flinching. "The altered survey is a clever forgery, my lord," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But not clever enough. The parchment has been scraped. The ink is of a later composition. It would not hold up to expert scrutiny." "This is outrageous," Julian snarled, rising partially from his seat. "Are we to listen to the deluded ramblings of a servant?" "You will sit down, Mr. Ashworth," Alistair commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. "Miss Vance is no longer your ward to abuse. She is under my protection, and she is speaking." Elara took a deep breath. "The journal is authentic, however. I have examined the paper, the binding, the ink. It is undoubtedly the late Duchess's hand." A flicker of triumph returned to Lord Ashworth's eyes. "And her words are most poignant," Elara continued. "She speaks of her deep melancholy, of her struggle. She writes, and I quote from the final entry, 'My love for Alistair is the one light in my darkness, but I fear my darkness will extinguish his light. I cannot bear to be the cause of his ruin. If I must fall, I pray he will know it was to set him free." A stunned silence fell over the room. Lady Beatrice looked horrified. Lord Ashworth stared at Elara, his mouth agape. That is not what it says," he stammered. "Isn't it?" Elara replied sweetly. "But it is in her hand, on the final page. Perhaps your copy was incomplete." Alistair picked up the journal, a tragic, final love letter, a testament to a troubled soul's devotion to her husband. I cannot imagine any authority seeing this as evidence of foul play. In fact, presented to the right people, it would generate a great deal of sympathy for a husband who suffered such a profound loss. He met Lord Ashworth's gaze. I believe your leverage has just evaporated. You forged it, Lord Ashworth accused, pointing a trembling finger at Elara. Forged? My lord, I am a restorer, not a forger, Elara said with quiet dignity. I merely treated the final page. It was badly faded, you see, almost entirely blank. I used a gallatanic acid solution to restore the faded iron gall ink. It is a standard archival technique. It simply brought the duchess's original words back to light. It was, of course, a masterful lie. The final page had been blank, but using her deep knowledge of 17th century ink compositions and calligraphy, she had spent the afternoon painstakingly crafting that final entry, creating a perfect, chemically sound forgery that was indistinguishable from the rest of the journal. She had used the Duchess's own words against her blackmailers. Lord Ashworth sank back in his chair, defeated. The plot, so carefully constructed, had crumbled to dust around him. Alistair rose from the table. My carriage will be ready in an hour, Miss Vance. Please pack your things. You will be accompanying me to London. He looked at the Ashworths, his face a mask of cold contempt. As for you, I suggest you pray. I am content with merely ruining you financially. If I hear so much as a whisper of this affair, I will not hesitate to pursue criminal charges for extortion. I trust I make myself clear. He offered his arm to Elara, as she took it, leaving .e. The rumbling of the carriage wheels over the cobblestones of the stable yard was a tremor that ran straight through Elara's bones. The world outside the leather-scented darkness was a blur of fleeing torchlight and rain-slicked stone. Beside her, Alistair Beaumont sat in a silence so profound it felt heavier than any sound, a gravity that pulled all the air from the small compartment. She had expected something, a word of thanks, an inquiry, a discussion of the astonishing act of forgery and defiance she had committed on his behalf. Instead, there was only the rhythmic drumming of the horse's hooves and the steady, quiet presence of the man who had, in the space of a few days, completely dismantled her world and begun to build a new one around her. She stared down at her own hands clasped tightly in the lap of her plain woolen dress. They were steady now, but she could still feel the phantom sensation of the quill pen, the meticulous scrape and press as she had given a dead woman a new voice. It was a violation, a sacrilege of the archivist's creed, and it had been her salvation. The thought sent a cold shiver of both terror and exhilaration through her. She, Elara Vance, the ghost of Blackwood Manor, had brought down a lord of the realm with a lie written in imitation ink. You were terrifying. The Duke's voice, a low baritone that seemed to absorb the carriage's ambient sounds, startled her. She looked up to find his stormy gray eyes fixed on her, his expression unreadable in the flickering gloom. Your Grace? In the dining room, he clarified, his gaze unwavering. You held the fate of every person at that table in your hands, and you did not tremble. You wielded your knowledge like a blade. It was the most terrifying and the most magnificent thing I have ever witnessed. The compliment was so strange, so far from the praise she might have imagined, that it left her speechless. He did not see her as a damsel he had rescued. He saw her as a fellow combatant, one who had chosen a weapon he had not even known existed. I am an archivist, Your Grace, she finally managed, the words feeling thin and inadequate. My duty is to the truth of the document. And what did you do tonight? He pressed, not with accusation, but with a deep intellectual curiosity. I defended a greater truth, she said, the answer coming to her with sudden, fierce clarity. The truth of your innocence, the truth that a woman's private suffering should not be a commodity for vultures to trade. The document was a lie, but it served the truth. A long, slow breath escaped him. You see the world in layers of meaning, don't you, Miss Vance? Like one of your palimpsests, text written over text. He leaned back against the squabs, the tension finally leaving his powerful frame. I came to Blackwood to recover a journal that I believed would prove my innocence. I leave with one that does, though not in the way I expected. You have given me back my name. The price is yours to ask. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. The offer of a comfortable annuity, a quiet cottage somewhere, a life of peaceful obscurity. It was everything she had ever allowed herself to dream of. But as she looked at the man beside her, at the weary lines around his eyes, the profound loneliness in his guarded expression, she realized her dreams had become more complicated. "I ask for employment, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady. "The Ashworths are ruined. My position there is concluded. You spoke of your family archives. I am told they are extensive, and I imagine, not perfectly catalogued. I am a master restorer and a skilled cataloger. I would ask for a fair wage, a small room to call my own, and access to your library." He stared at her, a flicker of genuine astonishment crossing his features. "After what you have done for me, you ask for a job? You said it yourself, Your Grace. You saw an expert in a field you required. My value is in my work. Allow me to prove it." A slow, wry smile, the first she had ever truly seen from him, touched his lips. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Vance. Very well. The position of curator of the Beaumont Archives is yours. But I must warn you, the library at my London house is vast. It may consume you." "A library is a sanctuary, not a prison," she replied softly. "I have been in a prison for 7 years. I believe I know the difference." The townhouse in Mayfair was less a home than a monument to centuries of Beaumont power. It was cool and silent, its corridors lined with impassive portraits of Alistair's ancestors. But the library was a cathedral of knowledge. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves connected by a spiraling cast-iron staircase, all bathed in the soft, dusty light filtering through a massive arched window. It was breathtaking, and it was a chaotic masterpiece of neglect. Books were stacked in precarious towers, folios lay unbound on reading tables, and a fine layer of dust coated everything. It was perfect. Elara found her footing here, in this quiet world of paper and ink. Her days were spent imposing order on chaos, her hands stained with the familiar scent of leather conditioner and binding paste. She created a system, cross-referencing deeds with correspondence, maps with journals, bringing the sprawling, silent history of the Beaumonts into a coherent narrative. She worked with a singular focus, driven by a need to prove that her worth was her own, not a debt to be repaid. Alistair left her to it, a gesture of trust she deeply appreciated. He did not hover or supervise, but in the evenings he would often appear, a glass of wine in his hand, and stand by the fireplace watching her work under the soft glow of a green-shaded lamp. Their conversations were tentative at first, confined to the discoveries she had made that day. A Beaumont ancestor who was a secret poet, a forgotten land grant that explained a centuries-old feud. One evening, nearly a month after their arrival in London, he came not with wine, but with the small leather-bound journal. Her journal, the one she had altered. He placed it on the table beside her. "I have read it," he said, his voice quiet. "Every word, including yours." Elara's hands stilled over a page of crumbling vellum. "Alistair," it was the first time she had used his name. It felt both forbidden and utterly natural. He did not react, his gaze fixed on the book. "The entry you wrote, it was a work of art. The perfect cadence of her phrasing, the subtle desperation. It was a kinder ending than the one she wrote for herself." He opened the journal, not to the last page, but to one in the middle. He pushed it toward her. The real last entry was there, the ink slightly blurred as if by tears. "He is a good man, my Alistair, strong and true. He thinks his logic can build a fortress around my mind, but the sea is already inside, washing away the foundations. I am a burden he cannot set down. There is a path on the cliffs, a place where the wind sings of release. Perhaps I will walk there tomorrow. Perhaps the sea will finally claim what belongs to it." Elara read the words, a profound sadness settling over her. This was the unvarnished truth of Lenora's despair. Not a romantic, sacrificial love note, but a portrait of a soul utterly worn down by illness. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered. "Because you should not have to carry the weight of your lie alone," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "What you did was not a desecration. It was an act of mercy. You gave her a grace in death that she could not find in life. You protected her memory from the Ashworths, and you protected me from a scandal that would have dishonored it. You served a greater truth, just as you said. But I wanted you to know the real one. He was trusting her, not with his archives, not with his reputation, but with his grief. He was showing her the unhealed wound he carried, the place where his formidable ducal armor was weakest. In that moment, surrounded by the silent ghosts of his ancestors, Elara felt the last of her fear of him fall away, replaced by something warm, complex, and deeply compelling. She reached out, her fingers hesitantly covering his hand where it rested on the table. "Thank you," she said, and he knew she was not just thanking him for his trust, but for seeing her, truly seeing her, as the woman who could bear its weight. That night marked a subtle but profound shift. He began to draw her out of the library, insisting she join him for dinner, then for quiet walks in the secluded gardens behind the house. He spoke of his own life, of the crushing weight of the dukedom he had inherited too young, of his frustration and helplessness in the face of his wife's illness. In turn, Elara spoke of her parents, of her solitary childhood, of the small, secret world she had built for herself in the margins of Blackwood Manor. They were two lonely people, accustomed to shadows, tentatively learning to stand together in the light. 3 months after they left Blackwood, Alistair announced they were traveling to Cornwall, to Blackthorn Keep. "It is time," he said simply. The keep was everything the legends claimed. A fortress of gray granite perched on the edge of the world. It seemed to grow from the cliffs themselves, a bulwark against the ceaseless assault of the Atlantic. The air was sharp with salt and the cries of gulls. It was a place of wild, melancholic beauty, and as they walked the battlements on their first evening, Elara understood how its mournful song could have echoed the sadness in a troubled mind. "This is where it happened," Alistair said, gesturing to a distant point along the cliff's edge, where the coastline crumbled into the sea. "The path is gone now. I had it closed off." He stood for a long time, staring out at the churning water, his face a mask of stone. Elara did not speak, did not offer empty comforts. She simply stood beside him, a silent presence against the wind, letting him know he was no longer alone in this place of sorrow. Later, inside the keep's own library, a smaller, more intimate space than the one in London, smelling of sea air and wood smoke, he showed her Lenora's rooms, which had been left untouched. They were beautiful feminine spaces, but filled with a palpable sense of absence. "I thought if I locked it all away, the pain would fade," he admitted, his voice low. "But grief is not an artifact to be catalogued and shelved. It lives with you. It breathes in the quiet moments." "Perhaps it doesn't need to be locked away," Elara suggested softly. "Perhaps it just needs a new context. The story of this place doesn't have to end with sorrow, Alistair. It can be the beginning of another chapter." He turned to her then, the ever-present guard in his eyes finally falling away, revealing a raw vulnerability that stole her breath. He saw her, not as a curator or an ally, but as the woman who had walked into the darkest corners of his life and had not flinched. The woman who had offered not pity, but understanding. The woman who had shown him that history, even the most painful history, could be restored. "You," he said, his voice thick with a revelation that seemed to dawn on him in that very moment. "You are the new chapter, Elara." He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. His touch was hesitant, as if he were handling a document of impossible rarity and fragility. When he kissed her, it was not a kiss of sudden, fiery passion, but one of slow, profound discovery. It was a kiss that spoke of gratitude, of respect, of shared solitude, and the breathtaking promise of a shared future. It was the closing of one story and the quiet, hopeful beginning of another. They stayed in Cornwall for a month, and in the wild, windswept beauty of that place, they built the foundations of their life together. When he asked her to be his wife, it was not a grand proposal, but a quiet question posed during a walk along the beach, with the gray sea as their witness. It was a question about partnership, about building a future, about taking the history they both carried and writing a new story together. Her yes was as steady and as sure as the tide. Their union was not the end of their work, but its true beginning. The Duke and Duchess of Blackwood became a formidable, if unconventional, partnership. Elara's meticulous mind and Alistair's ducal power proved a potent combination for reform. They began a sweeping program of more heritage stewardship, viewing the vast Beaumont estates not as a source of wealth, but as a public trust. Their approach was radical in its dedication to responsible governance. They established tenant councils and opened their ledgers, creating a new standard for financial transparency that rebuilt the long-eroded community trust. Elara, remembering a childhood devoid of opportunity, established a significant scholarship fund, ensuring that talent, not birth, would dictate the future of the children on their lands. They understood that true legacy was not in stone or titles, but in the well-being of people. Their combined vision blended a deep respect for Maj historical preservation with a commitment to creating a sustainable, thriving community for generations to come.